Today we're going to talk about one of the newer capabilities in Calico Enterprise. It's a multi-cluster management. My name is Jonathan Sabo. I'm a solutions architect here at Tigera. Let's dig in. So first, let's start off with Tigera. We are the creators and along with the community, the maintainers of Project Calico. And Project Calico, it's an open source networking and network security solution for containers, virtual machines, and host-based workloads. I'm guessing a lot of you guys are probably familiar with Project Calico. It's pretty ubiquitous across Kubernetes networking. We are built in with the majority of the public clouds as like the default policy enforcement for Kubernetes networking. Project Calico. We engage with the community in a couple of different ways. We have our website, projectcalico.org. You can follow us on Twitter at Project Calico. And if you want to contribute, we are always accepting pull requests from people. We've got over 150 plus contributors so far. We maintain a public Slack channel. If you want to, if you have troubleshooting questions or you just want to come and just observe and learn, it's a really good way to follow along on what's going on with the project and to see how other people who are operating their clusters today that are also using Project Calico, the things that they're working on and contributing with. Our Slack channels has over 4,000 different Kubernetes members, people from all over the different production Kubernetes installations. So there's a lot of knowledge there in addition to our team as well. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to go over, so this is the agenda. We're going to do an overview of multi-cluster management, Calico Enterprise multi-cluster management. We're going to go over the high-level architecture of how Calico Enterprise multi-cluster management is designed. And then we're going to do a demo. We'll start off with just kind of give you a tour of multi-cluster management, the visibility, the observability, the management, and the ability to see all of the functionality through a single pane of glass. And then we're going to deploy Calico Enterprise as on a managed cluster, and we're going to see if we have enough time to join it to our management cluster, and we can go through that together so you can see how easy it is to use multi-cluster management. And then at the end we'll have some time for some Q&A. While we go through this, though, if you have questions, I believe there's some Q&A functionality built into Zoom, and so feel free to ask questions via the webinar. And if that's also feel free to just ask questions in chat. And we have some people on our team that are on the demo here today, and we'll try to get to all of your questions. But if we don't have time or we don't have the answer today, feel free to drop us a line on the Slack and we'll follow up with you. So what is multi-cluster management? So Calico Enterprise multi-cluster management, what it is a single management plane to scale security across all of your clusters. It allows you to gain visibility, management capabilities for your network policies, the continuous compliance, the alerting, the threat defense, all of the functionality that you get with a Calico Enterprise installation. You get that across as many clusters that you join to your management cluster. It gives you the ability through a single pane of glass to manage and observe the security aspects of Kubernetes inside of a single UI. It also allows you to centralize authentication. And this is good from, it makes auditing a lot simpler. You have a single access point into the management plane to be able to manage sets of clusters. It also lets you centralize the logging, monitoring, and alerting capabilities of Calico Enterprise. And this simplifies the deployments in a couple of different ways. One, you have to provision storage in order to be able to store the flow logs and the audit logs. And this lets you do that in a single place. So you can have a single multi-cluster management cluster, and that's got all the logging, the monitoring, the alerting, and the authentication is happening in a central place, and allows you to add managed clusters to the management cluster and to be able to centralize the security across all of those clusters. Multi-cluster management also has some other capabilities. We have the ability to federate endpoints and services across more than one cluster. And what this lets you do is to apply policy using the same label-based policy that you're used to with Calico across more than one cluster. So if you have two clusters, cluster A, cluster B, and the pods are routable IP addresses, you can restrict inbound and outbound access between two clusters using our federated endpoint identity and services. We also have the ability to federate policy across sets of clusters. You can designate tiers and policies and manage those from a central location and send those down to managed clusters. So this is kind of like a high level, just a high level view of all of the capabilities that multi-cluster management brings to the table. It allows you to view all your managed clusters through a single pane of glass. So when you log into the management cluster, you can see all the managed clusters, all the other clusters that have been joined to your central management pane. It allows you to monitor and audit the security and compliance of all of your clusters from a single location. And you'll see just in a little bit when we get to the demo, how easy it is to just browse through and take a look and get a snapshot of the status of the compliance of the different clusters. You can look and see like, hey, is there any packets being dropped, or do I need to make any changes to a particular set of clusters? And you can compare and contrast really easily as you switch back from the cluster view, as you switch from managed cluster to managed cluster. And then what that does is that allows you to quickly troubleshoot the connectivity across Kubernetes clusters. It's also a single source for authentication across the managed clusters. And as I mentioned a second ago, we have support for some federated identity, service, and policy use cases. From a high-level architecture point of view, Calico Enterprise Multi-Cluster Management is made up of a couple different pieces here. We have, there's 3 different cluster types that we have. You can have, you can create a management cluster, you can have managed clusters, and then you can also have a standalone cluster. Typically, people will start off with a single cluster in their environment with Calico Enterprise as a standalone cluster. That's an all-in-one. Everything you see over in the image here will be in a single cluster. You have your manager UI, the Elasticsearch that's in the cluster that stores all the flow and audit logs is part of the standalone cluster. And then invariably what happens is organizations start to expand for a number of reasons. Maybe they want to split up dev, stage, and prod. Maybe they're creating clusters based upon for high availability considerations. You have a cluster per region, or perhaps maybe you have clusters per cloud. You have a cluster in EKS, a cluster in Azure on AKS. You're running Red Hat OpenShift in Azure. You're running Red Hat OpenShift in Amazon, and then you have some Kubernetes clusters on-prem. What Calico Enterprise will let you do is to designate one of those clusters as the management cluster, and then centralize the logging, monitoring, and alerting stack inside of that particular management cluster that you designated as the management cluster. And then you can join managed clusters to that management cluster, and then centralize all the visibility, the observability, and the management from a single pane of glass. The managed clusters themselves, what they do is they connect into the management cluster. They establish a secure tunnel back to the management cluster. And I want to point out that the connection is initiated outbound from the managed cluster to the management cluster. And this helps when you have Kubernetes clusters that perhaps are behind firewalls or are in different parts of the network. As long as they can make connections out to the management cluster, you'll be able to manage them centrally. So Calico Enterprise Multi-Cluster Management, it's hybrid and it's multi-cloud. What we allow you to do is to create a Calico Enterprise Multi-Cluster Management cluster, and then to manage and centralize the control and the visibility across not only groups of clusters in one particular environment, but across on-prem and across clouds and across self-hosted or publicly managed clusters. What you're going to see here in just a few minutes is that we have a couple of clusters, some in AKS, some in Azure, and some are running OpenShift, and we can manage all of those through a single pane of glass that is Calico Multi-Cluster Management. All right, so let's do it. So this is the Calico Enterprise Manager UI. And what we're looking at right here is the management cluster. And you can see that what we've done here is I have some managed clusters added to the management cluster. We have one cluster in AKS. We've got another one in AKS, another cluster in EKS in Azure. So we've got 2 clusters in Azure, 2 clusters in AWS, and then I have another 2 sets of clusters running Red Hat OpenShift in both of those public clouds. If we come around and we take a look at the nodes in the clusters, so right now we're looking at the management cluster. And I'm going to show you how quickly or how easy it is to gain visibility across your fleets of clusters. As we come over here and we mouse from Azure's AKS, we come over here and we look at the AWS EKS cluster, you can see that we get the ability to view the nodes in our clusters. You can see how quickly it updates as we go from cluster to cluster to cluster. And so you get the central view of all the nodes in your clusters, and you also get the ability to visualize the current status of the security in your clusters. Calico Enterprise gives you a high-level overview of the total number of policies in your cluster. You can see the total number of endpoints, the number of nodes. You also can see the CIS benchmarks for a particular cluster. So you can set global reports to run on a schedule across clusters, and then quickly browse from cluster to cluster and get a sense of the state of each cluster as you mouse over from cluster to cluster. I'm going to come back over here to the AKS clusters. And we're going to come in here and take a look at the policy views. And so as we come in and we take a look at the different policies, if I was to come in here and edit this particular policy, allow Coop DNS, I can come across from cluster to cluster, assuming I have the policies defined in a uniform fashion across my fleet of clusters, and I do. I can quickly compare and contrast the policies as I mouse from one cluster to another cluster. Let's take a look real quick back here at the high-level dashboards. As I come down here, you can see right now we see the packets by policy. It's all green, and what that means is that all the traffic in this particular cluster is allowed. And you can see here as we go to the next cluster. And just want to let this update here for a second. We can see that as we come here to the second Red Hat cluster, so we've got a blue and a green. When we come to the green, we can see it's not all green anymore. It looks like we've got some denied traffic here. And so there's clearly a difference between the blue and the green clusters. So let's take a look at this. Let's dig into one of these policies. Let's pick another one, not the stage policy. All right. So you can see that we have some denied traffic here. this particular policy in our trusted tier. And what this policy is doing, it's applying policy to the storefront namespace, and it's allowing inbound access from the DMZ and then all the other workloads running inside of the trusted zone. And then it's also allowing outbound access to workloads in the trusted zone and then workloads behind it in a restricted zone. It's a pretty typical segmentation pattern we see on-prem, and we see a lot of organizations replicating inside of their clusters, just a typical zone-based architecture inside of Kubernetes. And you can see that we're seeing some denied traffic here. So why don't we dig in and see if we can figure out what's going on. What I'm about to bring up is our network flow visualization tool. And what this tool does, it allows you to graphically inspect the flows inside of your cluster. And you can see as I mouse over the concentric rings, you can see how the menu changes over on the right. And what it does is it allows me to just visually inspect the different workloads running inside particular namespaces or particular names or status. I'm interested in figuring out what's going on with that denied traffic. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for the workloads that are potentially denying traffic here. And I can see that it looks like microservice 2 is attempting to contact the default DNS server of this OpenShift cluster, and it's being dropped for some reason. Okay, so now I know that we have an issue inside of these two namespaces, OpenShift DNS and Storefront. And I can see that this misconfiguration is affecting the ability for the front-end workloads, the microservice 1 and 2, to be able to access DNS. So let's dig in a little further. This is the Kibana that is installed into the management cluster. This is a centralized logging for all of the management cluster and all of the managed clusters. What I'm going to do is I want to take a look for denied traffic. And I want to look for that source namespace. I'm going to apply those changes. And I can come down and I can see it looks like the front-end workload is attempting to contact the in-cluster DNS server, and it's being denied. So what we're looking at here is the raw Calico Enterprise flow logs. One of the things that is special about Calico Enterprise flow logs, it gives you 25 or 26 different pieces of metadata, the Kubernetes metadata, in addition to the typical information you get in the 5 tuple flow logs, the source IP, destination IP, source port, destination port, protocol number. We give you all the Kubernetes metadata in addition to the 5 tuple flow logs. You can see that we're looking at this particular cluster, the demo Red Hat OpenShift green cluster, and you can see that our flow is being denied. And it looks like the destination is our DNS server inside of the cluster. And we come over here, we can see the source is our storefront application. And we can see the policies that are being applied to this particular flow, and ultimately whether or not it's being allowed or denied. So you can see that it's going through the security tier, the platform tiers, allow Coop DNS. And this is kind of interesting. So it's passing the policy that's supposed to allow DNS access, and then it's being denied by the default deny for the DMZ zone. And so if we come up here, we can see that the destination it's attempting to contact is our default DNS workload in the cluster, and we can look and we can see the different labels that it has applied. So let's take a look and see what's going on with this particular policy. We come down here, we can see here's our allow Coop DNS policy. Let's go ahead and edit this guy. And it looks like we're allowing egress access to the in-cluster DNS server to any of the endpoints that have the label Kate's app equals Coop DNS. Okay, well, let's take a look at the other cluster that was not showing any drop packets. Okay, so we can see that it looks like we applied a policy that it seems to be fine for our AKS clusters and our EKS clusters, but in Red Hat OpenShift, it looks like that the DNS pods inside of the cluster have a different label. So let's go ahead and copy this. It's equal to default, and let's go back over to our other cluster. And let's fix this policy. Just going to add a new key. And we're going to save that rule, and we're going to enforce that policy. All right, and let's see. Let's give it a second to for the flows to take effect, and see how our change affects the overall package by policy histogram. All right, it looks like everything is all green. So what you just saw was we were able to browse across clusters and compare the network policy enforcement that's been deployed to each of the clusters, and be able to visualize that configuration mistake, and be able to quickly drill in, figure out what's wrong, and then be able to fix that issue and apply it to the cluster. Okay, so you can see how we can centrally manage network policy, how we can centrally control the visibility, and be able to inspect the state of our clusters. We're just by simply mousing around via our single pane of glass, our management user interface. Now, for the next part of the demo, what I wanted to do is let's actually install Calico Enterprise as a managed cluster, and then let's see if we can add it to this managed cluster. So if you come to our docs, you go to docs.tigera.io, and you come over here to install Calico Enterprise. And if you come down to single management plane for all clusters, and you click on install multi-cluster management, you'll come here to these instructions. What we're going to do today, we already have a management cluster all set up. So we're going to add a managed cluster to the management cluster. I'm just going to skip down to the instructions for how to add a managed cluster to the management cluster. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is install Calico Enterprise on the managed cluster. All right. So I have an EKS cluster that I've set up already, and so it's kind of hanging out here waiting to be to have the nodes joined, and then the rest of Calico Enterprise installed. So let's start off by applying the AWS auth config. And so what the AWS auth config that we just applied, this is kind of standard AWS EKS installation steps. It's going to authorize the nodes to be joined to the cluster. And you'll see here the status that's currently reporting not ready will start to show ready as the nodes are joined. All right. So now we have Amazon EKS cluster up with the nodes. Joined, get nodes. All right, and so now we can start to do our Calico Enterprise installation. Let's come back and take a look at the docs. So the first thing we need to do is to install our operator.yaml, and then we're going to install a pull secret inside of the Tigera operator namespace. And what this is going to do is allow us to pull down the containers and the images that make up Calico Enterprise. After that, we're going to install the Tigera custom resources, and it looks like we're going to make some changes to the file. So let's get to this point, and then we'll come back. So I've already pulled down these files locally, and so let's apply them. Tigera operator. Okay, and then the next thing we want to do is we want to apply our pull secret. So the operator will be able to pull down all of our Calico Enterprise images. And then it says to download the custom resources YAML, and we want to make sure that the cluster management type is set to managed. So let's take a look at that. So the default installation type for Calico Enterprise is a standalone installation. And like we mentioned previously, there's 3 different cluster types you can have. You can have a management cluster, you can have a managed cluster, or a standalone cluster. What we're going to do is we're going to install a managed cluster. So I'm going to change this to managed. And I'm also going to come down here and delete a couple of these resources that we don't need on our managed cluster. If you come back over here, you'll see the docs tell you to remove manager and to remove log storage. We don't need a manager UI because we're going to be using the centrally located manager UI in the management cluster. And we don't need log storage because all of the logs will go to the management cluster. The LMA stack will be centrally located. So we're just going to go ahead and we're just going to delete these resources. And also going to get rid of log storage. We're going to leave compliance, we're going to leave intrusion detection, and we're going to leave the log collector. That's it. And we're going to apply custom resources. .yaml. All right. And so if we come down here, you can see the next step is to apply custom resources, and then we need to apply the manifests that we modified in this step here. We're going to add the managed cluster to the management cluster. First, though, let's take a look at this. All right. So Calico Enterprise has an operator-based installation. It makes installing Calico Enterprise and the management and the upgrades of this really easy. As you can see here, Calico and the API server are starting to come up. Okay, so now that we have the API server and Calico are both up, what we're going to do now is we're going to add the managed cluster to the management cluster. So if you come here back to the management cluster and you browse to the managed clusters, you can just click on add cluster. We can give it a name. We can label it as well. This lets us organize all of our clusters as we create and add more clusters. And when we click create cluster, we're given a set of YAMLs here. We have the management cluster connection, and we also have the Tigera managed cluster connection. So I'm going to copy these. You can also just click download and download them to your workstation. All right. So now we can see that we've added our managed cluster. And let me just refresh real quick. You can see, but this particular cluster, it's not connected yet. So what we need to do is we need to go back to our managed cluster and we need to join it together. So let me just say join.yaml. I'm going to paste this in. And what we have here are some certificates that were dynamically generated when we clicked the create cluster. And this is going to allow the managed cluster to securely connect outbound to the management cluster and join the party with the rest of the other clusters. But before we can do that, we need to tell it where to connect to. So let me just go ahead and add in the URL for the management cluster. And I'm going to save that, and I'm going to apply this. All right, and so now, all right, and so as the management cluster is joined to the management cluster, you'll see that the connection will come up. So you can see that we've got the connection coming up, and the rest of the installation will start to progress as the management cluster and the managed cluster communicate back and forth over the tunnel. The management cluster will signal to the managed cluster that it should be sending its logs over the secure tunnel, and essentially locate that inside of the management cluster. So we can go to a single place and view the flow and audit logs across our fleets of clusters. So this will continue to progress, and we'll check back on this in just a second. If we come over here now back to the UI, you can see now the Calico Enterprise multi-cluster management demo cluster is now connected. And so let's take a look at that. So if we come here and we look at the policies, and I browse over to my new cluster, you can see, oh, something's wrong. I don't have permissions yet to be able to actually view the policies applied to this cluster. So there's one more step that we have to do. Let's come back to the docs. As we come back, we need to, well, it looks like a couple more steps. We need to license the cluster, and then we need to apply the policies, and then we need to provide the permissions to view the managed cluster. So let's finish this up. Okay, let's watch this for a little bit. We'll see the rest of the installation start to progress now that we've applied our license. All right, and now we can apply the policies. All right. And then the last step that we need to do is we need to authorize the user that I've logged into the Calico Enterprise management cluster. I need to give it permissions to be able to view the resources in the managed cluster. What we allow you to do is we centralize authentication, but the authorization is still distributed per cluster. So you can have different permissions for all your managed clusters. Maybe you have a couple of team members that have the ability to administrate your Red Hat OpenShift, but you have a different team that is managing your EKS clusters and a different team that's managing your clusters in Azure. You can control all of that with RBAC applied to the managed clusters. So let's do that now. I'm going to give myself administrative privileges on this cluster. And if I come back over here, now I can view the policies. And I can go ahead and I can browse and I can see the changes that have happened across the cluster over time. You can see we just applied all of our network policies for the Tigera managed cluster. We can see all the endpoints inside of this particular cluster. We can see all of the different workloads that are running. You can see the labels and the policies that are applied to these different workloads. We can see all the nodes in our cluster. And we have the ability to visualize the flows as well. So we come back here and just a quick check. All right, everything's installed, everything's up and running. We have just installed Calico Enterprise on a managed cluster. We've added it to the management cluster. And now we should be able to centrally manage and centrally view all the flow and audit logs. If we come here, we can go to Discover. And with this, we have the ability to centrally manage and observe the audit logs, all the BGP information for a particular cluster to make sure that all of the nodes are either paired with your top or rack switches or are in a full mesh configuration. Make sure that everything is working as it should be. We have the ability to look through and see all the DNS requests inside of a particular cluster. and be able to use some of our advanced anomaly detection, things like the domain generation algorithms, be able to detect malware incidents inside of our clusters, to be able to look for events in all of our flows. If I come in to click on the indexes and we click on visualize, we should be able to see all of our clusters here. You can see that we've got our Sabo demo, our Red Hat OpenShift green, we have blue, we've got the management cluster, and you can see we've got the AKS clusters as we come across here. And so what we'll have is an index for every one of our managed clusters. And then we give you the ability to easily to observe and troubleshoot using the flow logs for the fleets of clusters that you've added to your management cluster. Just want to that's it for the demo today. I just want to make you all aware of some upcoming events that we have. Later on this month, we have some events on getting up and running with Calico Enterprise on your Rancher case cluster, an event doing understanding Kubernetes, a Coop proxy, securing your Kubernetes ingress traffic with Calico Enterprise, and then getting up and running with Calico host microsegmentation protection on Azure. We're also going to have another Kubernetes or Calico Enterprise Multi-Cluster Management event where we're going to explore some of the federated endpoint identity and services and policy use cases for next time. I also want to bring your attention that Calico Enterprise, you can try it out for free. All of the policy, some of the other functionality that we didn't go over today, you can sign up online. Just go to tigera.io/trial. You can sign up and get yourself a Calico Enterprise demo environment to go through and experience firsthand all of the policy auto creation, the preview, the staging capabilities, all the troubleshooting tools that we give you. There's a couple of different use cases for accessing workloads outside of Kubernetes cluster, potentially past firewalls. All of the continuous compliance functionality and the threat detection use cases are all inside of this trial for you to easily explore and come up to speed on.